There are times when people who are wanting to start a charitable program don't really want to start a full-blown nonprofit. Now, there's all kind of reasons why that may be, but for many, it's that they don't want the overhead of a board of directors, incorporation, getting 501c3 status, tax filings, the whole gamut. So if that's the case, what do? Well, fiscal sponsorship is a great option, and that's what we're going to talk about today. What is it? How does it work? What are some best practices? There's lots of stuff I'm going to cover, and it will really help you out if you're interested in this topic. Oh, and make sure you stick around to the end because we have an exciting announcement to make. You don't want to miss it. Hi, I'm Greg McRae, founder and CEO of Foundation Group, and welcome back to our 501c3 University channel, where we strive to make nonprofit issues understandable. Today, we're diving into fiscal sponsorship. Now, I've got a lot to cover, and this will be a longer video than usual, so let's get right to it. So what is fiscal sponsorship? Well, it usually involves an existing 501c3 nonprofit, the sponsor, offering to provide its tax exemption and associated benefits to another group, usually a charitable project of some sort. The project's purpose, now it should be generally aligned with the overall mission of the sponsoring charity. Donors who want to support the project give directly to the sponsoring organization, designating their gift to the project. Now again, the sponsor has 501c3 status, so that allows the donor to give to the project tax deductibly, even though the project itself does not have 501c3 status. Got it? Good. So here's an example to help out. Let's say Sarah wants to start a community project providing an after-school program to kids who are struggling to read at grade level. Sarah is a teacher and is passionate about kids learning to read proficiently. But Sarah doesn't really envision this idea expanding beyond her local area and also doesn't expect a ton of revenue to come in. She's looked at everything that's involved with starting her own nonprofit and feels like it's overkill for what she's wanting to do. Surely there's a better way. For Sarah, fiscal sponsorship would allow her to conduct her program, raise donor support, plus be able to get started almost immediately without having to formalize a corporate 501c3 and all that entails. What are some other use cases? Short-term programs are great candidates for fiscal sponsorship. Many times these projects are small community-based activities that are temporary in nature, and it doesn't make a lot of sense for them to go through the formality of incorporating at the state level, then applying for 501c3 status for a project that's going to wind down within 3 years or less. It could easily take a year or more just to get incorporated, receive an IRS letter of determination, and register at the state for fundraising. In such a situation, those managing the project, they may seek out the assistance of an existing nonprofit to provide fiscal sponsorship. The sponsoring charity will not directly operate the project, but it is responsible for reasonable oversight. Donors to the project give to the sponsor for tax deductibility, and the sponsor manages those funds on behalf of the project. Another great use case is what we call micro-charities. Now, there's not really a universally accepted definition of a micro-charity. What we mean by that is an ongoing charitable activity that is intended to be operated indefinitely, but it's small enough that those operating it would prefer not to formalize their own nonprofit organization. Now, examples of this could include a married couple moving abroad to operate a religious missions project, or a small neighborhood program like Sarah's tutoring program. The potential benefit of fiscal sponsorship, it's not limited to micro-charities though. Such an arrangement can even benefit larger nonprofits, especially those where the founders would prefer to focus all their effort on mission and let somebody else handle the tax and compliance concerns. We're convinced that a pretty decent number of people who start nonprofits might have chosen a fiscal sponsorship opportunity had they known it was an option for them. Our final use case involves an organization that is actually seeking its own 501c3 status but wants to begin operations prior to IRS approval. Now, this is an often overlooked opportunity for launching faster than the process would seem to allow. Now, technically, the IRS doesn't forbid incorporated nonprofits from operating prior to getting 501c3 determination, but there's no guarantee the IRS is going to approve your 501c3 application. And that translates into a lot of uncertainty about the tax deductibility of gifts by donors who give before the IRS status is granted. Plus, most states require a nonprofit to have 501c3 status prior to initiating any fundraising activity. Here again, a good solution is fiscal sponsorship. Founders of a nonprofit can temporarily come up under fiscal sponsorship while the 12 to 18-month process of finalizing their own 501c3 status plays out. It's a pretty clever strategic move that allows the organization to launch fundraising and operations quickly. So let me shift gears for a minute and talk about the requirements for the 501c3 that's providing fiscal sponsorship services. The decision by an existing nonprofit to provide fiscal sponsorship services to a group or project, or maybe to several groups or projects, it's not to be done without careful consideration. Legally, the sponsor is the organization that the project's donors are financially supporting. There are several important things to keep in mind here. Number one, the fiscal sponsor is fully responsible for all money donated to a sponsored project. Number two, the fiscal sponsor is who gives a receipt to the donor. Number three, the fiscal sponsor has some accountability for the actions of the project. Now, that varies by the model of fiscal sponsorship used, and we'll get into that in a minute. Number four, the sponsor must have sufficient oversight of the project to ensure that it's operating in a manner consistent with 501c3 requirements. And number five, money designated by a donor to a project must be accounted for by the fiscal sponsor as restricted funds. Now, if you don't know what restricted funds are, watch our video on that topic. There's a link in the description below. It's important. For those operating the project, they've got their own end of the bargain to uphold as well. Here's some things they need to consider. Number one, in order to benefit from a compliant fiscal sponsorship arrangement, the project is considered subordinate to the sponsor. Now, even though most sponsors don't exercise a ton of control over their projects, those operating the projects must understand that they don't have quite the same level of control as they would if they chose to start their own 501c3 organization. Number two, any funds passed through the sponsor that is used for personal compensation is subject to tax either as an employee or as an independent contractor, depending on the model of fiscal sponsorship we're talking about. Number three, donations given straight to the project that bypass the sponsor, they're not tax deductible and the donor must be alerted to that fact. Now, there is a Model F arrangement that may be an exception to this rule, but those are rare and complex, and not going to get into that today. Number four, should a fiscal sponsor decide for any reason to no longer provide fiscal sponsorship service to your project, the project no longer has tax-exempt coverage. Most projects in this situation they're either going to seek another sponsor or start their own 501c3. I want to talk now about the models of fiscal sponsorship because there's several. Actually, I'm only going to cover the two most common, models A and C. Under a Model A arrangement, the project is considered to be under the direct operation of the sponsor itself, meaning there's not really any legal separation between sponsor and project. If any individuals involved with the project are compensated, it's going to be usually as an employee of the sponsor, and since there's little legal distinction, there's also less control allowed to the project manager and considerably more liability on the sponsoring charity. Now, there are several pretty large fiscal sponsor charities out there that use Model A for their sponsored projects. I'm personally not a fan of this arrangement. I think it's the worst of both worlds, but others like it, so there you go. The model we prefer around Foundation Group is Model C. The Model C fiscal sponsorship is considered a grantor-grantee relationship, with the sponsor being the grantor and the project being the grantee. Now, there is considerable legal separation between the parties, as the project, it's really considered its own entity. While the sponsor still maintains oversight responsibility for program operations and funding, the program retains much more flexibility and is considered independent of the sponsor. There's also less legal liability for the project's actions that are resting on the sponsor. And like Model A, there's quite a few large fiscal sponsorship charities out there that use Model C for their projects. We see more of this in Model A for reasons that are probably pretty clear. Let's look now at best practices. There are many ways to structure fiscal sponsorship arrangements so that they pass legal muster. However, there is a framework that works best to ensure compliance and accountability. Let's start with donor relations. Acknowledging and thanking donors is essential to continued financial support. Some sponsors are pretty slow to respond to project supporters, and that shouldn't be. Best practice is for the sponsor to send a written or electronic thank you to each donor. Now, it's okay for the project leaders to also acknowledge that gift as long as the letter makes it clear that the sponsor is the 501c3 providing tax deductibility for the gift. Next up is cash flow. It is perfectly legal for a fiscal sponsor to pass through dollar for dollar the money designated by donors to the project. But that's not the best way for a number of reasons, including transparency, accountability, potential tax issues for those operating the project, and more. The better way is for the sponsor to set up a fund for each sponsored project. The money is retained by the sponsor until requested in writing for a specified purpose by the project. Then funds can be dispersed in a controlled manner for known reasons. This is Model C defined, really. Lastly, let's look at reporting. The project operators should provide an expenditure accountability report back to the fiscal sponsor, detailing exactly when and for what purposes the money was spent. Because the sponsor is accountable for expenditures, these periodic reports will assist in preparation of the sponsor's 990 at the end of the year. Ideally, the sponsor is going to provide a template report to the project on a monthly or quarterly basis, at least a semi-annual basis. Annual reporting can work, but it doesn't really provide the visibility truly necessary for compliant oversight. We can't leave this topic without talking about cost. One of the reasons a new charity may choose fiscal sponsorship over starting their own 501c3 is cost, and that's a legitimate reason. Overall, fiscal sponsorship does cost less, at least in the near term, but it's not usually free. Most fiscal sponsors will charge some sort of onboarding fee to new projects to cover the cost of getting them well onboarded. Provisions have to be made in the sponsor's accounting system. Online donation capabilities are usually involved. It's a lot, but it's almost always a fraction of the cost of a full 501c3 startup. Next, most fiscal sponsors will hold back a percentage of every donation to a project to cover the cost of ongoing fiscal management. Now, most often you'll see that percentage be somewhere between 8 and 15%. Most commons around 10%. This is where the cost-benefit analysis has to come in, though. Some projects grow to the point that their revenue becomes enough annually that the percentage holdback gets a little bit too high. That's usually a good time for a project under sponsorship to consider coming out from under that and getting their own 501c3 status. Well, that was a lot. I hope that helps you understand this issue a lot better. I promised you at the beginning that I had a big announcement, and I do. Coming in the next few weeks, Foundation Group is launching its own fiscal sponsorship nonprofit, Compass Charitable Partners. We've been working behind the scenes now for 2 full years to get this ready to roll out to the public, and we are so close. Pretty soon, we will have a great option for those seeking fiscal sponsorship to get set up quickly and easily and managed by the best and most knowledgeable team in the nonprofit community, utilizing technology that will allow us to serve hundreds, even thousands of projects. There's a link below in the description to the new Compass website, so check that out. If the link doesn't work yet, it means we haven't launched the website yet. In that case, bookmark it and check back. We've got dozens of potential projects waiting in the wings for us to open the doors, and we couldn't be more excited about it. Well, thanks for hanging with me for a very long video today. I hope it helped you out a lot. If you're interested in fiscal sponsorship, stay tuned for our Compass Charitable Partners launch coming really soon. Thanks for watching. Now go serve your community. Hey, do me a favor and don't navigate away just yet. We would really appreciate it if you would hit the like button below, as it really helps get our content recommended to more people. Subscribe if you haven't already, as we have great content coming your way on a regular basis. Finally, you can click the little bell icon to be notified of new content when we post it. To learn more about Foundation Group, you can visit us on the web at www.501c3.org. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.